This is Canon Fodder, episode 65, live from the planet Reach. We are surrounded by Covenant forces. All hope is lost, and all we can hope is that the Spartans can get off planet and fight another day. I don't know, just trying something out there. I'm with my friend Tom. You know him as the outgoing misanthrope. He's been here a couple times. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
So you're my resident Space Marine fiction guy at this point. This
Yeah,
is the third
you
time we're doing this, and this is the third Space Marine fiction we've done.
we've gone from it's interesting to not to disparage Forever War, but like we went to the grandfather of Space Marine, and then we went to like the antithesis of Space Marine, and now we're into kids Space Marine. And like the very shallow take, and I don't think this is a kid's book at all. I think it's an amazing book. But it is interesting to see we've chronologically stayed in order. And if we stick to this, I know that 40K is older, but we're gonna probably have to do an episode
We might do
on some 40K
like a
fiction.
Horus Heresy book here or there. I think that's probably a good one to do.
Right, and we're gonna
Uh,
get everything wrong just to make sure that Aristo and everybody else knows how
yep,
much
yeah,
we
we're gonna
respect
get the
the
lore.
canon.
We're gonna get the lore destroyed. Shout out to uh, Twitter guy Haphios. We miss you,
Mm,
buddy.
rest in peace, bud.
RIP. Hopefully you are posting about Marty O'Donnell once again in the future. So this
I
this episode is dedicated to him.
I completely forgot that he's probably gonna hear this, and now I'm terrified. I am
Yeah,
terrified
no,
that
yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
not gonna get this
yeah. No,
right.
no. You were like, oh, I don't care about 40K lore, but now that Halo lore is
Well,
on the table.
Halo's real sci-fi. I mean, 40K is cool for kids and Catholics, but like now we're talking Halo. Halo
Yeah,
is the deep cut. That's
I
obviously
will
a joke.
say, so the episode that's coming out before this, I did with Chris Sandbach, and uh, we discussed Paradise Lost by John Milton,
Hmm.
and something tells me that we're gonna get more people in the comments who are upset about some of the things we say about a video game than about the cornerstone of the English canon. I don't know what that means, but it definitely means something.
Well, it makes sense though. It's the same reason I get angry at people for tying Lord of the Rings movies to the Lord of the Rings books like they're interchangeable. It's because
Mm,
it's our canon. It's like, and that's for me. I know some people don't feel as strongly about it, but like I don't like interlopers. I don't like people who, when they say, "Oh, here are my books," and it's like shots from the movie. Like that's the cover of the book. I feel
mm.
like I'm better
I
than them
that
because I have the second edition, the second printing editions and the original maps and whatever. But it's that. I think it's that. I think that especially Halo too. Halo is foundational for a lot of people. Like in,
right,
in terms
right.
of just we've been thinking about it and playing it for a very long time. Whereas Paradise Lost, not to take away from it at all, but it's a very remote from us in time.
Fair enough. It is a big Think Boy piece, and this is just expanding on a video lore to be as crude as possible and to offend both sides.
Of course. Well, let's. I want to jump right into it then. If you're good to go,
Yeah, let's do it.
I want to start with the meta. I think I'm using that right. I'm not in the gameplay meta, but like the kind of the meta story of Fall of Reach by Eric Nyland. And you've got Halo the game. And a lot of people, especially the youngins, do not realize what the Xbox was, like what it did to gaming. Because you have Nintendo forever and you've got Atari in the back and got PlayStation. But then in a different world, you've got people playing real games on real computers to just kind of feed into the animosity between the gamer tribes. And the Xbox itself was a computer in more so than it was a gaming console in terms of the technology that went into it and how it functioned. Now I can't go too deeply into it. It's been too long and I haven't read up on it. But I do remember I had buddies who would get their modified Xboxes where you'd give it to some guy and he'd illegally and secretly for cash modify it, and you'd get a blue cover cap and a blue light instead of the green one, and then you were able to rip Xbox games onto it, and you'd insert memory, and that's where Xbox Connect or XBMC, Xbox Media Center, came from, which XBMC then feeds into Roku and a bunch of these other technologies that we take for granted. All of that kind of stems from the Xbox itself being
I
this
didn't
piece of
even know that.
technology. Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool too. People don't realize that. It was why, and if you ever get to experience an original Xbox, it's heavy as hell. It's this like weapon,
Yeah.
you could,
So the first
yeah, go ahead.
time that I ever saw an Xbox, I was a kid when it came out. My cousin had one, and he was the kind of guy he had to have. He would like he probably stood in line for the midnight release of the Xbox, right? And he got Halo, and I remember playing Halo for the first time as a kid. I didn't even know what I was doing. You know,
Mm,
that was that young. Let's see, when did it come out? 2000?
2000 or 2001, I believe.
Yeah, so I was not even 10 years old, right? When Halo dropped. And I just remember seeing like, oh wow, this is so cool. And then I kind of forgot about the Xbox for a while because I'd always had a PlayStation, right?
Mm.
PlayStation was my thing for the longest time. And it wasn't until Halo 3 came out and I was in high school that I was like, "Oh, this is a game that everybody likes," and I actually didn't like Halo. I thought COD: Modern Warfare was better because I liked, quote unquote realism. I liked shooting real guns and with shields are stupid and blah blah blah. And I didn't get enamored with Halo as much as most of the young men of my generation. But I got to tell you, I love the lore of Halo.
Hmm.
The gameplay is like whatever to me. I've played on Forge maps. I've played various games. Zombie or yeah, it was zombies, and then what was capture the flag, and
CTF, yeah, CTF is Halo, but Zombies was
no,
Call of
no,
Duty.
not zombie. It was like infected. Sorry, yeah, it was infected.
That was Halo
Uh
2, I believe, when they first brought that. That might be Halo 3 though. So look, to get back to the history of it real quick though,
sorry,
is
yeah, yeah.
and no, you're totally fine, because what Halo did was it introduced limitation as a feature. And I'm some gamer nerd can come, actually it was not, and I don't care. Halo was the first game where it's like, yeah, there's all these cool guns, pick two. Like, yeah, the rate of fire on your machine gun is incredibly high. Too bad you can only carry this much ammo. And it forced a kind of a tactical approach that, and again, coming from the not the console games, the computer games, where you could carry 7,000 guns and whatever. You had a lot of the elements of a computer, like a desktop game, but then you also had the controller for a console. And I remember that when you were a cheapo, no money loser, you got the small Xbox controller. But the real Xbox came with the large Xbox controller. And if you don't remember these things, it's worth like trying to find them to feel them, because it's
Right.
insane
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
compared to like the
those
direction.
things are nuts. Do you
Right.
remember
And
like
it's torture
I
now to
thought
use
the
the
I
big
thought
one.
the I thought the N64 controller was overdone. And
Totally,
it
because you
was.
came
It
from Super Nintendo with the little sardine box controller to that like
right.
three-prong controller.
The
Why is the third
three
prong there? You never use
yeah,
it.
well, no, the third prong was for
Weirdo
flying
lefties, I
games.
know. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, I
Well, I wasn't an N64 guy, but the controllers, the controller genesis itself of all these games is so fascinating, and like watching. And the Xbox controller ended up being, it's not the only one, and I know they've used PlayStation since. I believe it was a PlayStation controller that went down to the bottom of the ocean with the that little Titanic
yeah,
episode.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
Probably if they had
the
an Xbox controller, probably wouldn't have happened.
right,
I
right.
can't prove that, but definitely a wired controller, I would have felt better. But it spawned this whole thing. This Halo became a kind of a culture thing too. It was the game itself, and as someone who played Halo so much that I can't remember my childhood house as well as I can remember certain levels of Halo Combat Evolved. Like it's just ingrained, and we would play through the game over and over and over again on every setting. Whether doing legendary, try we would get to a point where we'd be like, okay, we're gonna do legendary, no bullets, like grenades and punches only,
Right,
and just
right.
see how
And
far
the
we could
game
go without
the
dying.
game even rewards you for doing stuff like this, because you could unlock the legendary armor. You could unlock and this was Halo 3. So my context
Right.
is always going to start with Halo 3 because it
No, and
was
that's good,
really
but I want you to realize something here that's really cool that we've lost is that Halo 3, which was amazing, by the way. Halo 2 was not bad. The dynamics were really cool. But Halo 3 is when they took everything that made Combat Evolved good. I'm just going to say CE or Halo CE. Everything
Mhm.
that made Halo CE become a part of us, plus the new technology that they'd kind of trialed with Halo 2, which Halo 2 is really cool game. I remember the release, it was such a big deal, but Halo 3 is when they had Call of Duty breathing down their neck and they were no longer unique. Like everybody had incorporated all the cool innovation. So I think
Mhm.
Halo 3 kind of stands head and shoulders above all the games. Now, I after ODST, I never played another Halo game. Actually, I played Halo Wars, which looked really cool, but it was like Babby's first RTS. It was terrible on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Xbox 360.
it's a cool world, but and because I
It
played a
looked
lot of
gorgeous, but yeah.
RTSs, it was
Any
just
RTS where you can't individually control the units, I just don't even care. Like it's
right.
just,
It's
I'm playing God, not demigod. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
whatever the case, all the stuff you love about Halo 3, not all of it, we'll say a lot of the functionality and fun of Halo 3 was what the studio learned from the people that were still playing Halo 1. So when Halo comes out, it's being played on this fuck off huge device that's more of a computer than it is a console, but it's technically not an RJ45, but that's just what we call them. So it's got an RJ45 like Ethernet connection, and you can connect your Xbox to other Xboxes. And this was crazy, at least at the time. And you can go
Mhm.
up to 4 Xboxes and you have the LAN party. And if we go too deep into LAN party, it's all I'm going to talk about. And there's no reason to talk about it because we do want to get to the story. But you had something that occurred because it was a computer and because Microsoft is not as smart as they think they are. They always overproduce and they put too much functionality, or they used to put too much functionality in
Yeah,
their
yeah. I mean, the
equipment.
Xbox. Well, the new Xbox I have is pretty good. The
Well, it's
Xbone
not a
and
good. Well, think about it this way though. Can you pop the case on your new Xbox and start
no,
modifying it? And yeah,
no, you can't.
they've learned their lesson. But when the first Xbox came out, they basically poured a ton of computer functionality into it, and then like put a little screw in with a sticker that says "Do not remove," and they're like, "That'll stop them," and it didn't. And so
No,
I will never forget Xbox Connect, which not with a K, but with a C, was this software that someone wrote to trick the Xbox into doing a LAN connection over a hub, over like a modem.
right,
And
right, right, right.
we were playing multiplayer Halo Combat Evolved, like way before Xbox Live was a thing. And that was amazing. And that was the multiplayer world. And that's a lot of fun. But to kind of recalibrate back to what we're talking about here, the lore of Halo is just so much fun because you are truly defeated and damned. Like
Mhm.
you have lost. You are not on the winning team. It's not up for debate. You are getting whittled down. The Marines, I hate how they did the Marines so dirty, but the Marines are functionally useless. You've got Fohammer who's flying the Pelican. She's about the only competent person you have to count on besides the AI. I hate to use modern kids talk, but the AI baddie in your head. That's it. It's you three, and rest in peace, Fohammer, the only competent post office lady ever. So you're playing this game and it's this like lost cause, and it's still so much fun to play. It's even optimistic, even though the lore itself, you're never getting off this ring. Like you're not going to survive. You're done for every single level, and it's still that optimism aspect's there. And because you're like a supercharged human, you've got shields, you've got speed and power, but you are still limited versus these alien overlord types with their laser weaponry and whatever. It was a really cool setup. It was a really cool story in addition to all the functionality of the gameplay. So I'm looking at it now because I want to get the dates right. But Halo CE comes out in November of 2001, and that year sticks out to me, but I can't remember why. I feel like something big happened that year.
The Yankees won the World Series like a
There's
month
that, and
before.
then that's right. Halo Fall of Reach came out October before it.
Right. Okay. Great.
So
Got it. Got it. Yes.
so the
Nothing else
sales were
happened
really
in
slow.
2001.
That's it. That was the big year. Oh no, that's right. The Pentagon couldn't account for $2 trillion. I think
Yeah,
something
something like
weird.
that. Actually, weird side tangent, but if you listen to old-timey but if you listen to old radio broadcasts, it's just so
Mhm.
surreal. I've been listening everybody knows I've been listening to Coast AM with Art Bell, right?
Yeah,
His old shows from, like, the '90s and 2000s, whatever I can find online, and his 2001 shows before 9/11 are just so, uh it's so eerie because you're like, dude, you have no idea what's coming. Like the world that America, like what America was,
mhm,
uh, in those first few months of the Bush presidency. It was like, oh man, I wish if I could like live in a time period and just like loop that, it would be that time period, like
interesting.
when Bush was an education president. And like the big scandal was him quote unquote stealing the election from Al Gore. So
Yeah.
really from January 22nd, 2001 to 9/10/2001, that's the world I kind of want to live in, as uh if I had like a Star Trek holodeck, that's where I'd go.
Well, I think we should consider doing this isn't literary at all, but a 9/11 retrospective because I think it'd be interesting. Something I torture myself with every 9/11, if I have the time, like, off, is I watch the news. You can find it on YouTube. It's just a 3 or 4 hour video clip of the news from that morning.
Mm,
And, like, I just watch it and, like, watch the commercials and watch just what everyone was thinking about and talking about until the first report comes in, and then just it's horrifying and it's fascinating to me, and we can totally loop this back to our subject matter because Master Chief does lose his world, but just that everything seems so innocent. I know it wasn't innocent. I know bad things happened before nine
right,
eleven, whatever,
right,
but
right, right.
so it's interesting to do a literal tie back here, and this is something we were talking about before we started recording. Is to get into what the story of the fall of Reach is, like what's happening. And I'm gonna go with the illusion that I built with us, but I'm not no moral valence, no, not gonna use any naughty words or anything. But the best way to envision the humans, let me roll back for a little bit. So humanity in the Halo universe is spread out across the stars. They have the Shaw Fujikawa drive. I don't know, I always say Japanese names wrong, but that's the slip space drive. And so you've got normal space physics, and then you've got slip space, and they don't really understand slip space, but that's how our story manages to get humans, around the speed of light limitation. And
Which
so they're
by the way
scattered. Yeah.
Which, by the way, very cool, right? Because one of the things that modern science fiction does that I really hate is that they try so hard to explain with quote unquote real science how things could work, and it usually just makes the lore just a jumbled mess. Here,
Mhm.
you've just got, oh, we've got slip space, it just kind of works. Just have fun with it, like,
It's the
and
ultimate.
we don't know how it works, you don't know how it works. Just
Well,
get
it's
past
sci-fi
it.
Giga Chad too, though, because it's critical to the story, and yet
Right,
it
right,
takes
right.
like 2 paragraphs, maybe. Like, they don't even I'm not gonna explain this technology, but it's also gonna motivate the plot and be this huge factor on which things turn.
Like
But no, I
that's
like that too.
that's
I like deep sci-fi. I like it when
right.
when I spend 3 chapters explaining, like, how this magical thumb drive works. But I also, I very much like stories like this where it's like, we have this drive, that's how we do it, moving on.
It's
Because
but
they don't over explain it.
to borrow, so Star Wars did this originally,
Mm.
and then a bunch of Star Trek nerds got involved and they started editing like the Wikipedia, so everything has to make sense. It's like, well,
Right.
actually, the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs means that he was able to go through yada 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 at a shorter distance than everybody else. And it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
Not the
shut
point
up,
of the
nerd.
story. Yeah.
Like,
It can't all be three-bodied
nerds have
polytonas,
literally ruined everything.
But they also create it too, so it's the 2
No,
sides to the coin.
I'm not giving Halo to the nerds.
They don't get it. It's too Chadly. They, you just what was it? B button? Just a pistol to the back of the helmet. But to get to the story here, we have this spread out human empire. They don't call it an empire. They don't really explain the politics. Like, they don't go in too deeply into it. But what you do have is you have the UNSC, which is the United Nations Space Corps, space whatever. That's the military, and it doesn't get into the human politics of it too much. But the reason for the Spartan 2 program, which is, yes, implies there was a Spartan 1, and there is, in fact, Spartan 3, deeper into the lore. But the Spartan 2 program was
I
initially
think they
envisioned.
even get up to Spartan 4s, don't they?
I've only read up to Ghosts of Onyx. Like, I have like 4 or 5
Oh,
Halo books.
I thought in some of the Halo, like in Halo 4 or 5, they have Spartan 4s.
Well, so again, that's the game. I never played after ODST, so I don't know
Oh, I
where they
see.
went with that lore. And then I found out because I have the original Halo
If
book, Fall
Haphios
of Reach
leaves
book
the
somewhere, but I had to buy a new one because I couldn't find it in time.
mm,
So I didn't get the original. But it did have lots of like information about the book itself, how it sold, how it came together. I did not realize there's like 15 Halo books. I thought there
yeah,
was like 4 or 5, and I had them all. So like Harvest, Ghosts of Onyx. There's a couple other ones too. And whatever the case, the Spartan 2, the Halos, the Spartan
yeah,
2s,
John Halo.
yeah, John Halo and the Halos. Spartan 2 program was initially envisioned as a way to deal with the innies, or no, the innies, I'm stealing from other lore there, but basically the separatists. Is
Right.
that you have this far-flung network of human habitations, and so naturally people want to break away and they don't want to follow centralized rules, blah blah blah. It's kind of rote, it's kind of old school story, whatever. That's what they were initially envisioned for. And so for anyone that doesn't know the Halo lore, the Spartan 2 program, started by Dr. Halsey, who is, if you want to understand who Dr. Halsey is, she's the seed crystal mind
She's the
for what
Dr.
Cortana becomes.
Mengele of
Exactly. Oh yeah,
Halo.
they very subtly, without being political, one of the other beautiful things of the pre 9/11 era is that you could make oblique references to the evil mid-century German Empire. You could incorporate, what was that German, not 343, group 522 or whatever it is, the Japanese experimental program. You could bring
Oh,
elements of these,
Unit 371.
or whatever they are, the ones who did some pretty heinous things allegedly. I don't know who I believe. That's a joke, don't cancel me. That's Dr. Halsey, right? And Dr. Halsey is this brilliant mind who becomes again the seed crystal for Cortana, the AI, who has her own genesis that you get in this book. But she collects these children at about age 5, 6, and this is where
She's putting a team together.
yeah, right, of kids. And it's so refreshing to see someone um collect other people's children illegally, but for war, not disgusting
Not for
perversion. It's just
right, right.
it's
I
such
was
a
thinking about
refreshing
that.
thing because you're like, oh God, what's she gonna do to these kids? Oh, child soldiers. Thank God.
Oh,
That's so much better than
she's just gonna turn them into like Joseph
okay,
Kony's
she's
army.
not gonna eat them. She's not gonna do things to them. This is amazing. So
Uh,
she collects them, and they're all genetic lottery kids too. So she uses the power of God and anime to select specific children who are mentally able, physically able, and genetically able to withstand what she's going to put them through. And there's like a throwaway line that they like insert genetic slugs into the place of the kids. So like mom and dad lose
yeah,
their
yeah.
kid,
There's a
and
yeah,
then they come back and
which
then they
is
die
so
like 6
messed up.
months later of like cancer or
Right,
something,
right, right.
which is
Yeah,
horrifying for a parent to hear. But
awful. No,
narratively, it's kind of
okay.
fascinating because you're getting a look into Halsey's mind here because she's like, closing the book on the missing kid so no one comes looking. Pretty devious, pretty intelligent. I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, so that's the thing that I think I appreciated the most about the book, right? Is that it doesn't hand wave away the awful things Halsey does, but it also doesn't stay on it
Yep.
too much. Like it doesn't you can tell Halsey has misgivings and her resolve most of the time is shaky at best, right? When it comes to the Spartan program and what
Yeah.
has to be done to these children in order to in order to quote unquote save humanity. Because again, as you said, it was just to put. They were originally created to just put down insurrection. I think it
Yeah.
was
Insurrectionists.
Daja, the AI, uh,
Yeah.
who says, "Oh, the reason that we're doing this is because within 5 years, all the insurrectionists will destroy the human UNSC will be destroyed from within." and this is before they even know that the Covenant is out there, or it's widely known that the Covenant's out there.
Right, and so you
Uh,
have magnitudes of existential threat too, and there's an innocence to this because the game and the book were both developed before 9/11. So
mhm.
this is even before that first year after 9/11 where we start to become familiar with all the neocon and other arguments for like why it's okay to do bad things. Why it's okay to slaughter
Right,
12 million Christians in the Middle East because of, fight them over there instead of here. None of that had happened yet. So
right,
so Nyland and the story, the 343 and Bungie and whoever's doing this, all they had to work with was the Cold War and then like right after the Cold War. So it's kind of a fascinating look at what was available to them. We have such a plethora of resources now. If we want to model characters over like
right.
questionable choices, like we have so many to pick from. And it's
Exactly,
not like there
and
was
that's
never
that's what
anything
kind of
before 9/11,
pisses
but
me off. That's what
yeah.
kind of pisses me off about the modern Halo lore, is that all of that seems to be thrown out, right?
Hmm.
That or even modern video game lore in general, like the industry itself is just awful,
Yep.
and the writing is awful, and the games are usually buggy messes when they come out, and you're buying 60% of a game, and I sound like a total boomer right now, but I don't
No,
care
but it's valid. It's
because
valid. And it's worth saying too that you can't blame the woke. The woke shit is terrible, but it's so easy to pick out that
right,
terrible
yeah,
stuff.
there's
There's a
there
flatness to video game narrative that was not the case when we were younger. It just
right,
wasn't. Like there was some,
and
not
and
to say
and,
that there weren't boring games, but there was depth.
I would blame the market incentives more so than the woke. I think that the woke is probably a symptom, not a cause, right?
Well,
It's
contractually,
let's
I have
just
to blame women and minorities, but I think I agree with you personally
right,
that,
right.
yeah. Well, I don't want to blame the market too much too, though. I think one of the big problems with games too, and we are going to get back to Fall of Reach, but one of the big problem with games is there's just so much money at stake. And it's not
Mhm.
that there was no money before, but it was this little ecosystem unto itself, completely divorced from movies, except for the occasional story that would get out. But like, I don't know when it came out. I'm not going to look it up. But like the Mario movie, I remember seeing that as a kid, and it was just like this insane thing that had nothing to do with the video game that I'd seen other kids play before.
Dude, Dennis Hopper played Bowser basically, and yeah, it's a trip. And there was
But those are
also
the crossovers, right? That's an insane crossover to take the video game that people like hop around this two-dimensional world and to get that movie out of it, you see that there's like no connective tissue
there was
between
also
the game
what was it,
itself.
the Super Mario Super Show, which was like the
I
cartoon.
I'm out to see on this, and I'm sure other people could get into it. But one thing that we have experienced is that video games now are a massive, massive revenue generator,
Yes,
even as they're failing. And I'm going to plug
right.
him. I know people like him, but the Razor Fist guy, like I get most of my video game information from him occasionally, and so he
Yeah,
talks about it in a really sober way. But just talking about like a video a few months ago, just talking about what that market looks like. It's measured in the billions. That is not the case when these games we know and love from our past were coming out. There's still lots of money in it. They were still expensive to make, but just orders of magnitude different. But
right.
yeah, so just getting back to the Halsey character, um, you see it throughout the story too, because she's filled with doubt about what she's done, and her evil extends to other people. And we get introduced to Captain Keyes, who's not a captain, he's an ensign when we first meet him.
Mhm.
Um,
Right, right. He's
he's just a bus
he's
driver.
selected. He's selected because he ain't no snitch.
Exactly. He has this interaction where someone else did something wrong and he knew about it and he wouldn't say a word, did not drop the dime, even though other people did and he could have. He didn't. It's the only reason he's picked. And she touches his life. And then, as we were discussing before we recorded, Keyes is instrumental in this lore in more than just the bus driver. Like he is the bus driver for Halsey, and then he's the bus driver for 117, getting him to Halo. But he's got
Mhm.
this integral part to the story, and this is the texturing that Nyland puts into the book. And it's worth noting that Nyland was also, and I don't know the degree to which, because I just read this in the forward of the copy I got, but he was with BioShock. I think that was a game company, or it might be a game itself,
No,
but
BioWare. BioShock
BioWare.
is the game.
That's right. Okay, so he did stuff with BioWare. He was a big part of Gears of War, which I've only played a little bit, but I've seen Like, I've watched
That's a
the Gears of
that's a
War
game
lore,
with
and it's
yeah, that's a
awesome.
game
Like,
with good lore too.
yeah, and so you've got this guy who just he gives a shit about these stories being actual stories, not just being like, for me, when I first read game lore was the StarCraft 2. There's a couple handbooks where they go deep into like the history of the Protoss and the Zerg and what the Terran Federation is, and I loved it. It was so cool that they put that much thought into it. So it's not just restricted to Halo. There used to be a lot more narrative muscle and metal, mettle, like for these writers to like push to create good stories to go with this stuff. And you don't need Fall of Reach to understand Halo CE. It stands alone, it's great. But with Fall of Reach, when you read the story, when it gives you the background of the Spartan 2 program, you start to understand a little bit more that 117 is not human. There's always that debate, right? Like, are these humans? You're like, no, he stopped being human when he was 6 years old. That's not when the surgeries happen. They do the surgeries when they're like 14, 15. But just imagine, go back in your head to being a 6-year-old and you get pre-selected like Harry Potter, but instead of going and, farting around with like gay magic stuff, you go to boot camp for the next 10 years. Like, you
So
don't stop doing boot camp. Like, you just
so one of my favorite films, and I think we might have even talked about it before in one of our episodes, but it's Soldier with Kurt Russell.
Mm,
And
yeah, no,
that
I saw that
you
a
have
long
seen
time
it or
ago.
you haven't?
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Man, I cannot remember how old I was. But yeah, no,
But
that's the one where they hip fire, which I always hated. But otherwise, like, it's a
right.
really cool
Yeah,
story.
no, the hip firing is kind of dumb,
But he's so
but
good, it doesn't matter, right? Like,
yeah,
he's
and he's just like he's a super soldier basically, and not even like he's only trained. He's been trained since he was a child for war, right? He's repressed his emotions entirely, but he still has them. He's still human at the end of the day, and he actually has to fight off a bunch of quote unquote genetically modified super soldiers in the film.
that's right,
Great.
because he's the older version.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then they
he's
have a
the
newer version.
obsolete. Yeah, he's the obsolete version. Dude, it's such a good film. Like
Yeah,
you
I'm
got to
looking at it
watch
now,
it.
I couldn't help it. Of course, Gary
Uh,
Busey's in it. Oh, man. Oh,
yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah, I do remember this.
Gary Busey's great in it
Doesn't he
actually,
have, like,
and
no dialogue either? Like,
no,
it's
no,
very little dialogue.
he has a few lines, but the thing about Gary Busey is, especially when he was like an actor doing stuff, you didn't want him doing too much, like because he would just take it off the rails. Like the perfect amount of Gary Busey would be like his role in Lethal Weapon as Mr. Joshua, where
I've
it's like,
never
oh,
seen the Lethal Weapon movies. I'm so bad
dude,
about that.
you gotta watch them. They're good.
I think
But
I've seen
he
4 and the opening where Mel Gibson uses the Beretta to, like, gun down like a school shooter from a really far away. That's all I know Lethal Weapon is.
Yeah, yeah, dude, Lethal Weapon's so good, and it's like the movie that put Mel Gibson on the map. And I Lethal Weapon 2, it's besides 3
Weird
and
way to
4.
pronounce
If
Payback, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if
I just love Payback. Payback that's the Mel Gibson movie for me. It's that he just kills it with that role, pun intended.
all right. Well, anyway, we're way far afield here. But
Yeah, we are. We have to which
if you
Kurt Russell,
watch
by the way, was,
Soldier,
he was considered for when the Halo movie, rest in peace, and now they're pissing on the ashes with that joke of a TV show, which I refuse to discuss or watch. I don't care. But there once upon a time, there was gonna be a Halo movie. I believe Peter Jackson was tapped, or was it
yeah, Peter
forget?
Jackson and also Neil Blomkamp was
That
involved
would
for
have
a
been
while.
amazing. God, that would have been awesome.
And
But
then actually his footage became District 9.
that's right. That's the story. And so the program, like the team he put together for the drawing, the post-production finishing or whatever, the graphics, which I love District 9. But there is a really cool little Halo series of movies shot in Canada, so the actors are kind of cheesy. It's have you seen it?
I
It's not
haven't. I
is
could
it
just
Forward Unto
imagine
Dawn?
John Halo. You know. Well, sorry for crashing my spaceship there. Uh,
No, so it's
you got these alien hosers coming down. And,
yeah. No, it's what the hell was it called? It's
Forward
not
Unto
Legends.
Dawn,
It is.
or
It is Forward Unto Dawn, but they call it Landfall. It says Forward Unto Dawn. I remember when it came out, they released it in segments, but it's really cool little story of like OCS for a bunch of kids who are going
Mm.
into, again, fighting the insurrectionists, the innies. They do call them that. They don't know anything about the Covenant menace, and then the Covenant comes to their planet, which is like a training planet, and they get saved. A few of them get saved by Spartan 117, which is not canonical for any stretch, but it's a really great short film. Like, it's really cool, and I remember when it came out, they released it like online. It was just cool for its time. But that's the other thing to think about with this Halo world, is it spawned so many separate, not IPs, I don't know what the best word to put for them, but these independent entities that by coloring within the lines of the original Halo lore end up being really, really good. Even if they are not perfectly lore correct to themselves, they are really cool offerings. And
S-
they got blood from that stone eventually, and that's why I checked out after ODST, which is a really cool game, but I just didn't want anything more to do with it, because I just feel like they were straying away from what it was.
So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something that I've thought about, especially now that I'm I'm a father, right?
Mm,
What how much evil is worth greatness,
mm,
right? Uh and the example that I used to think about was Mutt Mantle and Mickey Mantle. Mutt and Mickey had a great relationship, more or less, for Mickey's life, but Mutt was very tough on his son, right? And made him into this great baseball player, like the greatest baseball player, if not ever, certainly of his era. And if he hadn't gotten injured, he probably would have been like greatest of all time, right? He was a switch hitter. He could hit with power, but he could also play the field. He was a great he was the baseball player, right? But a lot of the stuff that he went through as a kid, those demons stayed with him. He got into drinking, he got into gambling, everything, right? Like Mickey Mantle, after baseball, the dude was just shot, right? But
mm.
he's also, the kid. Like everybody knows who Mickey Mantle is, and he's gonna live forever as like one of the greatest ball players ever. And you got to think, and this is like this is small in comparison to we have to recruit all these children and turn them into super soldiers in order to keep the human empire running and also to save humanity, right?
Right.
Different levels of scale, but you can think Halsey's actions are extreme. You can hate her for it. She probably hates herself, but you're damn happy that Spartan twos exist long enough to make a difference in the Human Covenant War.
So this is a really cool topic. This isn't a diversion. I want to go into some detail here, and you in the product Halo, Fall of Reach tracks very closely to the game because the creators of the game and Nyland corresponded. That was intentional. They did that on purpose. They colored within those lines together. But then you get this break because Halo 2, Halo CE is such a titan that there was a lot of pressure to make Halo 2 better and blah blah blah. It was a big release, but the stories didn't stop. And once the book caught on, it sold slowly at first. By I think I read by 2003, it sold 100,000 copies. So you have this dichotomy of the games and the book story development. And the games go off in a direction, and I'm going to circle back to this real quick because people have the timeline really messed up with the Halo universe and where it's at in the war with the Covenant. But the books go off on this really interesting discourse into Halsey trying to make up for what she's done, because secretly behind her back, Ackerson, who's a different guy in the ONI like ecosystem of military intelligence and experimental weapons development, starts the Spartan 3 program, and he builds the Spartan 3s. Now, none of this is in the games that I know of. But the Spartan 3 program, instead of the Spartan 2s, which are these like get them young, train them immaculately, put them through the biomedical process of enhancing them, and then whoever survives that becomes these super soldiers. Spartan 3s, everything is rushed and they are intended to die. They're the equivalent of a sci-fi suicide bomber, just
Mm.
with some extra steps. And she finds out about this because the Spartan 3s get sent to like kill off some Spartan 2s. Again, we've diverted from the game lore here. And then she uses what becomes Forerunner technology, um, to kind of create a bubble world in a pocket dimension. And I know I'm ruining like 3 books at once for a lot of people here, but she creates a pocket world for the last surviving Spartan 2s and Spartan 3s. And it's so funny because the Nyland and the 2 or 3 other authors that did the Halo books, they worked very hard to create this parallel story that fits within the universe, but didn't violate any of the rules, and it didn't impact the gameplay. Like, because it goes in literally in a different direction, like in space time, away from Earth, which is where the Halo story goes. And I strongly encourage people read the Halo books. Again, I've only read like 4 of them. I didn't realize there's so many, but the 4 I read are awesome, and they continue this theme of Halsey struggling with what she's done to the Spartan 2s. And the introduction of the Spartan 3 element is very fascinating because their armor is not as good, their training's not as good. They get the super soldier serum, but it's not administered the same way, like with the same kind of deftness and thoughtfulness that Halsey's team does at trying to keep them alive. And there's hundreds of them, not just a handful. And so it's a really interesting element that it's kind of unfortunate that they never followed, because it would have made really cool games to see like Spartan 3s against Spartan 2s, whatever. Picking up the threads of my thought here. So they stick with that element of Halsey, of this moral question on top of the existential survival question. And it's not unique. This is the question that it was the same thing in Starship Troopers, but asked in a different way. And it's the same thing in the Forever War, but rotated and expanded and contracted at the same time. So we keep running into this question. And maybe this is why I love the Space Marine element so much, is because it's dressed up as super soldiers, awesome battle armor, kick-ass weapons against an unstoppable foe that doesn't care and just wants to exterminate you. But it always boils down into, like, what do we lose? What are we throwing into the fire to defeat this enemy? And that's a timeless question from my perspective for us as American men, we'll say, keep it open-minded a little bit. But real Americans, is what are we willing to throw on the fire? Like, what are we willing to sacrifice for victory? And the book, and they touch on this a lot in Fall of Reach, and Spartan 117, he has this dialogue with himself as he understands. And I did want to do a reading of a section of the book if you're willing to
Yeah, sure.
do that. And we'll get to that in a second, but I want to set up the world a little bit for people who might not know this backstory. But when you look at the Covenant versus the humans, you might get the impression from just the game that this is the beginning of the war. This is when they first ran into each other. Or I don't know what people get. I don't remember what I thought, because I read these books so many years ago. But what's happening, the best parallel that I can come up with in my head, and the whole time I've been trying to think of another one, but I just can't think of one because this one works so well, is that think of the humans as the middle 20th century German army in 1944, 1945. And the Covenant are the communist Russians and the communist allies in the East and the West. And that puts you where you need to be to understand the immensity of the human struggle against the Covenant. They're not evenly matched. Typically, when they have space battles, for the humans to win, they need to outnumber the Covenant 4 or 5 to 1, and they typically lose 60 to 70% of the ships to do it. So I'm not very good at math. For people like me, that's 40 human ships versus 4 Covenant ships, and they lose like 30 ships to knock out
Well,
those 4.
and to take well, actually, I guess it'd be the opposite. But there was that what was that quote from, it was a German tank commander. He's like, yes, one Tiger tank or one Panzer could take out 4 American tanks, but
Yeah.
unfortunately there were always 5 of them.
Yeah, there was always a 5th one. And on the Eastern Front, it was even worse in that this is documented that your average Panzer could take out 10 to 12 Russian tanks, and it didn't matter. And so it works on both sides. And we see World War II, the second global war of progressive aggression, as this like
Oh my
set in
god.
stone, this set in stone battle. I can back that up with facts and science. It's this like we know the outcome, and so there's this kind of always has been, always will be to it. But when you put yourself in the middle of the conflict, it was not at all clear that the United States, Britain, and Russia were going to defeat Germany in detail. And in fact, it didn't seem like that was going to be the case until near the end of the conflict. And when you saw the Germans go up against the Russians in particular, the Russians were so woefully inept on a soldier to soldier basis. And it's not that there weren't good Russian soldiers, it's just that they all died. Same thing we're seeing right now with Russia versus Ukraine. Anyone can look me up and see where I stand on this, but the 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 finest Ukrainian soldiers are dead or in jail. Like, and we are into the third round of drafting and putting an army together. It's not that Azov doesn't have good guys and you don't have these other detachments that have good guys, but they've burned through the flower of a generation, and now they're starting to pull older and younger. And again, I'm not taking moral
And
side
the
in this
mentally
context.
handicapped.
Everyone goes in when you are fighting an existential battle, whether you should be or not. Again, let's leave the moral question out of the Russia-Ukraine war and just look at it like it's a sci-fi story. Of course, Ukraine is going to throw women and retards and handicaps and old people and they're going to throw everybody into the fire because their regime, just like the UNSC, there is no negotiating with that enemy. Now that breaks down as an illusion because it's not an existential war, and it's criminal what the NATO side is doing right now to Ukrainian people. But let's just leave that out of it. And I really like the mid-century German army metaphor, because when we get to 1944, there's no negotiating. Now, the guy Murder Maid has apparently done a podcast going into in depth about World War II, and I'm very excited not only to
He's
listen.
only the preview is out so far.
Right. I'm excited to see how people did, because if anyone listening thought the whole Churchill was a bad guy was just like revelatory, oh my God, I can't believe he said that out loud. Buckle up, because you're about to find some very interesting facts about the mid-century Germans and what they tried to do to end the war. And it always shocks people too, because people don't read the primary sourcing, but World War I is the same, is that there were lots of off ramps before you get to the end. All of that goes out the window with our story here, though, because the covenant will not be negotiated with. Not cannot be. Like they on
Oh yeah,
first
they have
contact with
they're
humans.
they're intelligent. They have the faculties. They understand.
Yep.
The
And the
covenant
ability
is
too. There's no language barrier. They
yeah,
understand within milliseconds of making contact with humans. They send a message in space standard. Everyone speaks English in the future, always. That we are going to exterminate you.
and the thing
That's
about
it.
the covenant is it is a collection of different alien races,
Yeah.
right? So they understand peace and negotiation,
That's a
and
really good point. Yeah, they fully have the capacity to incorporate if they
they just
want
want
to.
to destroy humanity. And and
Right.
and the Lord gets into that later on. There's like the whole thing with the forerunners
Well,
and
that's what I was gonna say.
the flood.
As much as I don't know the newer games, I have watched like those like hour long the story of this game,
Right.
and they did some things right. That's cool. Like Forerunner technology, and before that, it gets a little bit up its own ass in some areas of just being so, but it's still interesting.
And
It
it's funny
holds my
because
interest.
you can see that with Bungie's next project, Destiny. And anybody who's a
I know
Destiny
nothing of it.
fan, oh, it's like their follow up to Halo, and it's like kind of open world, and it's like a looter shooter.
Hmm.
And you basically play like a souped up John Halo. I just like calling him John
I know
Halo.
you do. I'm dying a
uh,
little every bit inside, but I know that it's for the greater cause, and so we got to finish the fight and just
right,
tell
but
the
just
story
you know,
of John
it's
Q.
like
Halo.
it, yeah, it was just I don't know. I didn't like it. I know a lot of people who did. If you're a Destiny fan out there, whatever.
I'm
Uh,
unfortunately scarred in that every time you say Destiny, I
I
don't
know.
see a sci-fi
You
character in my
yeah, no,
head.
you think of
I see
Beyonce.
a horror
Ob-
comedy character in my head.
Obviously, you think of Beyonce and Destiny's
Yeah,
Child.
100%. That's yeah, of
That's
course.
the only other context
Why
in
would I
which one.
think anything else?
Right.
But so looking at the story of, and I encourage anyone that doesn't, I mean, it's probably not this fan base of yours, but should you not know the story of the two pieces of World War II that I think more people who've read a lot of books and they know a lot about World War II, 1937 to 1941 and 1944 to 1945, but looking at it from the German perspective or looking at Burma and China, like looking at these things that have been kind of just kind of forgotten because they're either really morally ambiguous, or it's like the perspective of the bad guy, or it's just hard to tell the story because, especially on the Eastern Front, people don't realize just how few Americans died, how few British died, how few French died compared to Germany and Russia. And it's insane. And that's one cool thing about the Halo story, The Fall of Reach, and John Halo. Um, they clearly did their homework and they knew at least a little bit about this because the losses are just staggering going up against the Covenant. And it's really cool too. And I hope you've seen this as you worked through the book, is that they know nothing about the Covenant at the time of Fall of Reach. And again, bear in mind here that at Fall of Reach, the parallel to World War II is it's 1945, and the Soviets are streaming in from the east, and Fall of Reach, what I said to you before, Fall of Reach is the parallel to the Bridge of Remagen, where the Allies are trying to find a bridge to get into mainland Germany, into the Ruhr, into the economic and industrial heartland of Germany. That's what Reach represents. So in the Halo universe, you have Earth and the inner colonies. That's the core population base of the humans. But Reach is the core of the military capacity. It's where they build the ships. It has, like, if you've played in Halo 2 and you remember when the Prophet of Regret jumps into Earth, like Earth space, unpredictably, they didn't know he was coming. If you look at those defenses in the orbital platforms, they're minuscule compared to what Reach had. Like, Reach was the most heavily defended outpost, 100 ships at any given time, with many more ships able to jump in, mostly cruisers and carriers, like just overwhelmingly defended. But it was it. Once Reach goes, there's really no more capacity in the human empire. Again, they don't call it an empire, but on the human side of the equation, to build up their military again. And so that's why I really like this allusion to the German armies, because once the Allies crossed over into the West and got into the Ruhr, and once the Soviets had breached through what was left of Poland, even if the Germans wanted to keep fighting, they couldn't rebuild anything. And you've got the Courland pocket up in the Baltic states, which held out to the end and had a negotiated truce. They didn't lose unconditionally. You know, they handed over their weapons after an agreement, and the Allies guaranteed it and then reneged. And it's this terrible story of honorable men who'd survived the entire Eastern Front, which is insane. But you see parallels of that in terms of the Halo universe, where you've got these pockets of humanity, but humanity's on its back foot. Like, it's done. The Covenant is destroying them systematically. And when the Covenant moves in and beats the UNSC, it doesn't occupy their territory, it glasses it. They bring ships in and they scour the surface of the human planet of all life and move on. So it's not an army of occupation. It's not taking territory for the sake of resources or anything like that. It is a extermination campaign. And when you look at it, when you read in Fall of Reach too, when they talk about the Covenant, they know about grunts, they know about jackals. They've just interacted with hunters for the first time, and they kind of know a little bit about elites. And that's all they know of Covenant society. They don't know about high charity. They don't know that it's a moving capital and world, that they actually don't have a base of operations. They have no idea that it's a very shaky confederation predicated on theological interpretations of the Forerunners' work, and that it's actually very fragile society with no home planet and no ability to support itself without constantly moving and expanding. Like, all these are things that we've learned since Halo 2 and Halo 3 in the lore. But at the time of Fall of Reach, it's a more than 2 decades of just absolute balls to the wall warfare and humanity is losing. Like, no matter what they do, even when they win, they lose. Every victory, the few victories they have are Pyrrhic victories. And this is the world of John Spartan. This is the world of Spartan 117. This is the conflict he's seen, and this is why the Spartans are held in such high regard, is because alone among all the forces of humanity in the UNSC, the Spartans are able to take on the Covenant and beat them without sacrificing themselves every single time. And so that's like the world of it. And it's this real it's a really cool world too, the way they built this up. And from Halo 1 to Halo 3 is less than a year. And it's at the end of the war. It's not at the beginning, it's not at the middle. This is the end of this war. And I'd have to think about it for a long time whether I feel like they ended it well. And again, I'm stopping at Halo 3. I don't know what 4 and 5 is about and how they go along with it. But the way the war comes to an end is kind of fascinating, where even though the humans win and the Covenant breaks up, like, what have they won? All their worlds are glassed. All their territories, all their colony worlds are gone. Their whole network is gone. Reach is gone. Like, Earth is not doing too well, even though they beat them. So it's this really bleak kind of look versus what we talked about with Forever War, which is bleak, but for different reasons, and with Starship Troopers, where they've got the bugs on a back foot and they're pushing. This is a story of humanity. It's just to bring it all together. It's Pyrrhic victory. That's really what the whole Halo lore comes to. Is it's always a Pyrrhic victory. And so when we look at it from, just to kick it back at you, now that we know this about the story, is Halsey justified in what she's doing? Like, is it the right thing to do to sacrifice children's innocence and humanity for survival? Not a rhetorical question, because I know you're
Yeah,
thinking lots of these thoughts.
yeah. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. Uh,
Yeah,
Halsey, as awful as her choices are, at least she's not like psychopathic. In
yeah.
some of the games actually that she does appear, she does kind of she's at the point where she is sort of a psycho.
Well, they also
Uh,
don't know how to handle. I'm going to sound so liberal here, but they don't know how to handle truly strong women characters, because the only way they can do a strong woman is it's like she's well put together, she's pretty, she's petite, she beats everybody, she's good at everything. Mary Sue, right?
yeah,
Halsey's not a
it,
Mary
it is
Sue.
it is funny how in the beginning she gets out of slip space and the first thing that, or yeah, she gets out of cryo sleep, and the first thing that Captain Keith like notices, like, oh wow, yeah, she's a wood.
Hmm. Yeah, like they're younger too, because that's the beginning of the conflict, right before they figure out that the Covenant's there. So she gets into it. She's this young genius, and she is a genius. She's got no love interest though. She's not appealing on any other front except that, like, some of the physicality. But I have no problem. It's like Kelly Spartan. What is her name? I forget her number. But Kelly's this really cool character, and I'm pretty sure they put her in one of the later Halo games and probably messed it up. But she's Slavic extraction is the presumption. She's not a smiler, but she's a runner, and she moves very fast. She's tall. This is a really cool period when authors were trying to incorporate women
87.
into
She's
male
she's
spaces.
she's
Oh,
Spartan.
87. Awesome. So we'll just say 087 is a really cool example of how authors and creatives were trying to incorporate women into these masculine roles on masculine terms, instead of trying to, like, I hate to invoke George R. R. Martin, asshole, but the Brienne of Tarth character is better to me because she's ugly. She's a brick shithouse. She's
Hmm.
tall. She's dull and weird looking and stares at people. She's not attractive, which is totally believable if she's going to be any good with a sword. Like, she can't be feminine. Like, you cannot be feminine and good at sword fighting. I'm not talking about epi and, that joke like fencing. I'm not talking about that. I mean, using a chunk of sharpened metal to brutally murder someone before they can kill you. Men aren't good at that. Like, there's very few people that can best everybody they run into. And I like those kinds of characters. I don't have a problem with 087 or Linda the sniper. Always got to kill the redhead. They always kill the redhead. But you've got these female characters, but Nyland didn't like put them in and be like, oh, and they're good at everything. Oh, and she's there with her arms crossed, like smirking at John, stupid male. Like that's all they know how to do now. They can't write a female character with any kind of depth or believability. And so it's cool when you got 087, when you got Kelly and Halsey as these not archetypes, but you've got these two examples of these females in a martial role. And one of them is it's her moral ambiguity and her technical brilliance that makes her valuable, but she struggles with the implications of what she's doing. And then you've got 087, who is incredibly physically fit, can move quickly, is smart, no interpersonal skills, can't smile, boring flat person, like just not even a human at that point. That's so much more believable to me than just like every female character having the full panoply of like desirable traits.
Right.
And it's good.
And
There's a realism
there,
factor that's so valuable.
there's a part where Sam, the Spartan Sam, sacrifices himself to
Rest
blow
in
up the
peace, Sam.
Covenant ship. R.I.P.
Yep.
Sam. And this is where Kelly first shows any sort of emotion at all.
Yep.
Where she's trying to she's trying to reconcile the fact that he can come with us even though he's hit, his Mjolnir armor is pierced, there's no way that he can leave the ship, and he's a dead man walking, right?
Yep.
So the fact that she tears up at this and is like, she's upset, this is the only family that she really has ever known.
Exactly.
And even John himself is kicking himself for losing another man, and
Broken. He's broken by it, but he doesn't stop.
Right. And that's the thing that John learns throughout the series is that one, he won't always accomplish his mission, right, and two, his role as the squad leader, as the chief petty officer, as the leader of the Spartan Twos, and really the leader of humanity, is going to come with great cost, great personal cost to himself in the form of losing his people.
And Halsey takes these children and deprives them of growing up and their humanity, but then gives them superpowers and a family. Right. So, and as a father now, because like when I read this, in high school, now I was like the way liberals are still waiting for their owl, I'm still waiting to get abducted and sent to Reach.
I would love to please go be a super soldier.
Yeah, like they give me the DH treatment and then start it over and like give it to me. That'd be awesome. But then I think what if John Halo shows up on my front step and says, "Hey, your son, your daughter, is a perfect specimen. Brilliant physicality, is going to be off the charts. We need, what if Donald Trump, peace be upon him, blessings for the 1,000-year reign of Donald Trump and Elon Musk show up at my door and want to take one of my kids for the good of the republic, for the good of the empire." It sounds like a silly question, but it's really not. It's actually the question that all of us as parents, I believe. Now people can disagree and they can think we're in a bright tomorrow and everything's going to be great. That's fine. But I don't think so. I think humanity's on a negative trajectory right now. I think our numbers are way too high for the capacity we have for society. I think it's way out of whack. I think there's a lot of surplus humanity. And I'm not saying that to sound like Scrooge or be like, oh, we're better. I mean that if we get hit with a serious cataclysm on our planet, we don't have the intelligence or the resources or the organizational capacity to keep going at the level that we are. And so I think it's a more relevant question. Maybe it's not going to be aliens, maybe the Covenant isn't going to jump in. Maybe it's not going to be any of those exciting kind of stories. But maybe it is going to be a question of whose kids get fed, who gets to live inside and who has to live out in a tent. And we'll see in 10 years who's left. Like, these are questions that I think are going to be relevant. And it's still, even though they're framed differently, are you willing to put your kid on the lifeboat and sit there and freeze in the water? And anyone you ask that to face to face, they are going to say, yeah, I'm going to put my kid on there. But we know from history, we know from reality that there are a lot of shit parents out there
I
that are
have
going
a
to put themselves
child.
first. Yeah, it's that's I mean, I know it's
Or that Norm Macdonald joke where he's like, when
which
I'm an old man, and the Grim
sacrifice my
Reapers
grandkid to get the kid for cancer.
go take my grandson.
But it's true, and that's why Norm is so good, is because he was so good.
R.I.P. Norm.
I know, too much. We've lost too many. Um, but it's true. What we are oftentimes willing, and I'm not sitting here from some position of moral primacy either or supremacy, because like I'd like to think I would never sacrifice my children for my own happiness. But like we do it in microbursts. Like we do these little things where we choose our own happiness, we choose our own comfort. Oh, and but we're just doing it in the long term. Like we don't see it now. But like when I'm like late to work or I'm not working on these projects and I'm not doing these things that could be bringing in more like revenue and doing when I when I buy food with red 40 in it, when I allow preservatives into the home or any of that gross shit in our food, I am choosing convenience over the health of my children. So I do think it's a relevant question. I know that's kind of a side trail, and I
Yeah,
do want
dude,
to do a
dude. I mean, dude, that was a real heavy digression from, and I just want to talk about Halo, man.
I know, but that's why this is so good. That's why I love this story so much, is because it and we talked about this before in other mediums. Good fiction is this amazing, like by constraining your attention to this made up story, it opens the doors to so many other thoughts, and it like creates thoughts upon thoughts, and it spirals outward. And this is for me trying to write fiction and trying to make stories that not inspire people, because I write very bleak stuff, but like get people to think about thinking about thinking about things. You know, it's a video game novel. Like it's not
Right.
some
And it's
contender for an amazing award, and yet there's
I'm
so much put into it.
I'm going to read the rest of them. I'm like invested enough in from reading this book that I was like, oh yeah, I gotta find out the rest, even though I
And
I,
it's
I
good
know
too.
how it ends. Yeah.
Nyland does a good job with the stories. Like they aren't just like popcorn reads. Like there's like he puts this one's the best in my opinion, although Ghosts of Onyx is really good. I don't know which one's the best, but it's worth your time. It's worth your time to continue the Super Soldier Space Marine arc. You down for a reading?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, this is going to come from just a little bit of context here. Um let's see. So yeah, the Spartans have just been informed that there is a covenant. So at the time in the story, this is the before the Covenant Wars have begun. They are just starting to go on missions against the insurrectionists, and they don't have their armor yet. They've had their modifications and upgrades. They have the ceramic titanium knit on their
Oh yeah,
bones.
that one mission that they go on where they have like
They
some
track the
armor was
cigars and the brandy to get to the
yeah,
the, the gang boss. Yeah, it's awesome.
yeah, no,
And
really cool stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, these guys are more than just their armor, which is necessary. It was a necessary thing to put into the lore.
yeah, and they you put them in there, and then they get one round of armor, and then they get the actual armor. That's another
Right.
cool thing, and I don't know if you're there, but they
Or them fighting in the dark in the mines of Reach.
oh, it's yes, it's so they
So
that
cool.
there's all these yeah, when they're fighting the Spartan 1 power armor, like in total blackout conditions, and they're like doing
Yep.
it by hand.
And they're like, where did they get the uniforms and the rope?
Yeah, and they do it all themselves. So that's the story. That's what's so cool about it. And that's before I read this section, because the section is I picked this one because of that. When I read this as a high schooler, like I got the book, and I swear I have this book somewhere, but it's like one of the original ones that came out that year. Um, I swiped it from a kid in math class who very kindly was like letting me read a chapter, and then I pretended to accidentally put it in my bag and never looked back. But he had gotten it from someone else. These books like moved through white nerd, like white nerddom, like wildfire, just same as the game. Like I remember there were like that was like the delineating factor between the cool kids and like the nerds was like Halo. And the books were really like monumental or just phenomenal at the time. And this was still when a lot of us still read. Cell phones hadn't fully infested everything, and yeah, end of an era. Just going back to that 9/11, that kind of capstone for the end of America's high point, the high water mark of the 90s. And this comes out of it. It's interesting coincidence there of Halo coming out right as the American dream dies. Like they didn't know it at the time, but the dream of 20th century America, shot in the heart by a couple of airliners and some probably Saudis, who knows. But anyway, going to this section. So this is the Spartans have just been briefed on the Covenant menace, and they are about to get their armor. They're going to be put into the armor, and it's this huge process. It's why they don't take the armor off. And like we talked about with the Shah Fujikawa drive, like they talk about what the armor can do, but they never kind of address going to the bathroom. They don't talk about eating
Going to the
food or
bathroom
anything.
or just literally powering the power armor.
Well, but they do get into that. They throw that line. It's a microfusion generator that just plugged into the back, and you can see it in the game. There's a little bump on the back of the original Halo. That's the power generator, but doesn't explain how you have a microfusion generator that you can wear. But it doesn't matter because it's cool and it works like for the story. And again, that's the prototype armor. They will eventually get their actual Mjolnir armor later. But this is before that moment, and so they've just been briefed. They're sitting in the briefing room. And I'm going to pick it up right here. John stayed behind. He had to talk with Chief Mendez. Dr. Halsey spoke briefly with the chief and the vice admiral. Then she and the vice admiral left together. Beowulf backed toward the far wall and faded away like a ghost. The chief gathered his hat, spotted John, and walked to him. He nodded to the hologram of the scorched colony, Harvest, still rotating in the air. "One final lesson, petty officer," he said. "What tactical options do you have when attacking a stronger opponent?" "Sir," John said, "there are two options. Attack swiftly and with full force at their weakest point. Take them out quickly before they have a chance to respond." "Good," he said. "And the other option?" "Fall back," John replied. "Engage in guerrilla actions or get reinforcements." The chief sighed. "Those are the correct answers," he said. "But it may not be enough to be correct this time. Sit, please." John sat, and the chief settled next to him on the riser. "There's a third option." The chief turned his hat over in his hands. "An option that others may eventually consider." "Sir?" "Surrender," the chief whispered. "That, however, is never an option for the likes of you and me. We don't have the luxury of backing down." He glanced up at Harvest, a glittering ball of glass. "And I doubt that an enemy like this will let us surrender." "I think I understand, sir." "Make sure you do. And make sure you don't let anyone else give up." He gazed into the shadows beyond the center platform. "Project Mjolnir will make the Spartans into something new. Something I could never forge them into. I can't fully explain. That damned O&I spook is still here listening. Just trust Dr. Halsey." The chief dug into his jacket pocket. "I was hoping to see you before they ship me out. I have something for you." He set a metal disc on the riser between them. "When you first came here," the chief said, "you fought the trainers when they tried to take this away from you. Broke a few fingers, as I recall." His chiseled features cracked into a rare smile. John picked up the disc and examined it. It was an ancient silver coin. He flipped it between his fingers. "It has an eagle on one side," Mendez said. "That bird is like you, fast and deadly." John closed his fingers around the quarter. "Thank you, sir." He wanted to say that he was strong and fast because the chief had made him so. He wanted to tell him that he was ready to defend humanity against this new threat. He wanted to say that without the chief, he would have no purpose, no integrity, and no duty to perform. But John didn't have the words. He just sat there. Mendez stood. "It has been an honor to serve with you." Instead of saluting, he held out his hand. John got to his feet. He took the chief's hand and they shook. It took a great deal of effort. Every instinct screamed at him to salute. Goodbye, Chief Mendez said. He turned briskly on his heel and strode from the room. John never saw him again. So, like,
It's so
I
cool that
picked
the
that.
chief had a chief.
Say what?
It's so cool that the chief had a chief.
What do you mean? Oh yeah, the master. I was like, what are you talking? No, of course. And then the Mendez character comes back in Ghost of Onyx. And I won't say any more about it because he has a really cool role. Like a kind of a redemption kind of role. But Chief Mendez, like you've read now, he's critical to this whole thing. He's the father, Halsey's the mother. And so Nyland puts together the classic storytelling elements, even while being a sci-fi book about a first-person shooter video game. Like, he follows the rules for what a story needs, that it makes sense. You need the dad and the mom. Even though you're pulling these kids away from their families, you cannot raise humans without a mom and a dad. You end up getting this weird hybrid creature that's always seeking a father or always seeking a mother, or just broken from not having these things. And they'll find them and invest that necessity into a thing, a substance, a person, an event, a band, whatever. So it's in the story. And I love that section because it captures, for me, it captures a lot of the emotional subtext that I can now recognize. But at the time when I read it, I'm just like turning the pages as fast as I can and
Like,
rereading
all
the
right,
book.
where's
It's
the
so
alien
awesome.
fighting?
No, but not even that. Just like, I love the whole story, but I didn't. Of course, I want the battle scenes, and I want the story, because then I'm going to put the book down and fire up the Xbox and go play, and I like the background stuff. But this is the stuff that sticks with me, even though I don't realize it. This the never quit angle, that what we're fighting for and who we are, why the super soldier is compelling. So much modern shit is like, wouldn't it be cool to be a super soldier because you could do all these super things, versus wouldn't it be cool to be a super soldier because you could go help defend, I don't know, Rhodesia, because you could go fight off the swarms in Chosen Reservoir, because you can go tip the balance. That's, to me, what's so powerful about the super soldier archetype, is it's this deep desire of the men of our tribe, our group, our people, to tip that balance against the uncountable, like, unwashed hordes that are streaming towards us to take away everything that we like and love and want and need, and just destroy it. And it's not that normal men aren't fighting. It's not that our fathers weren't able to fight. It's not that there aren't people trying, but we are outnumbered and we are outgunned. And every one of our victories feels like a Pyrrhic victory for a very long time. And so it's just, something is so appealing about 117, of this guy who has been thrown on the fire by other people and who's come through it with everything inessential burned away. And he's this warrior's warrior, and he's not an asshole about it. He's not excessively humble. He's just so mission focused. Like, he's so keyed into what needs to be done. And I think that appealed to a lot of guys. And this is back in the halcyon days of 2001, 2002. And even with 9/11, life was a lot more, like, even with 9/11, watching those towers burn, nobody was like, America's over. No one with a brain was like, America's over, it's done. Like, we're gone, our country's gone. It was like, no, now we need to go kick ass. Like, we need to go fight these enemies, blah, blah, blah. But now that we stand on the precipice of the West collapsing, and I don't mean to be a black pill, I'm very happy with what's happened over the few weeks, but elections don't change, geography.
Donald Halo
They
will save us.
John Halo will save us, and he'll come
No,
through a portal to do it.
Donald Halo.
Donald Halo. You mean Baron 117? Um, man, he should be a diplomat in, like, Saudi Arabia or something. He
He
should
was
be,
already the tallest Spartan before the
right.
unification.
And that's a cool element too when you look into the story, is that 117 is not the biggest, he's not the fastest, he's not the tallest, he's not the strongest, he's not the best shot. Like, they're all amazing. Like, every Spartan that,
He's not even the most deadly.
nope, he is the
The
leader.
luckiest.
Yeah, and that's what it is, and that's what's such a cool theme that you don't get until the very end of the story, when Cortana picks up on it algorithmically, that there's something weird about him, and she's going through his files and she's looking through it and she's trying to like piece together like, okay, why is he the leader? Why has Halsey always prized him over everyone else? Why has she always risked him first but given him everything before anyone else? And she realized it's because he's lucky. And that is not a cop out, in my opinion, with the narrative elements of the story that Nyland put in. It's not that John wouldn't be anything without the luck, but the luck element is this magical thing that we've all seen. Every one of us has known an intensely lucky person. And if you don't, you're probably the person. Like, but there are these people who just things kind of turn on them, or like things like events turn on their presence, or so it seems. And so I think there's just I could gush about this book forever. I think it's so good. It's just deep enough. It's not excessively deep. It's not shallow. It's a quick read, and it makes the game so much more vibrant and fun to like know these background elements. And it's I think it's sad that the books went one way and the game went another, because I think the game, I don't know, and I don't know the history too, because I know 343 Studios, Bungie, there was this like falling out, and they like different people got a hold of the IP, and then Microsoft does what it does best. But it's a definite read for me. Like I cannot wait for the day to hand it off to my son and to like give it, and it's a book that I'm always happy to encourage other people read, because they tend to look at it like, what, the video game? Like they don't think there's anything there, but there's a lot there. And it in my opinion, it deserves to be there with Forever War, with the with Starship Troopers, the story. It's right up there. It's a beautiful continuation of that tradition.
I
And that's
think we
all I
can end
have to
it there.
say about
Yeah.
that.
Where can people find you? How can they support you and your work?
I am the first time we did this, I said things were happening and they haven't happened yet. Some stuff's coming, but I make mistakes on Twitter, starting fights I shouldn't, and I will be writing on Substack again someday. But they can read a lot of my writing there. I've got, I think, 47 or 48 essays up there that there are a lot to dig into. But yeah, just find me on Twitter and click on the link. And I'm trying to think of who should I shill right now. I know you got one that just came out. The collection of stories.
Yep.
So
The,
that's what everybody
the
should
search
be.
for more money.
The search. That's so perfect. I know Rambo Van Halen he's got a book coming out soon. There's a lot coming around the corner, and I guess this is what I'd like to leave it on to. It's not NDAs, but I do have gags on some things that I can talk about. But what I can say is that with everything political going on, with everything global, all these things are important, and we should focus on them. But John Carter, one of the handful of Canadians that I really love, just put out an amazing essay talking about where do we go? What do we do now? That the we didn't do the long march through the institution. It's called Blitzkrieg through the institutions. It's on his Substack. Everyone should read it. But he gives some amazing advice there, and it's just time to start doing things. It's time to start standing up to HR. It's time to start not quietly letting people say terrible things about us because of the color of our skin or because of our beliefs, because of our religion. Now is the time to take territories and consolidate and to build things and do things, because it turns out you can just do things. And this is the time to do it. And we're going to have a window to be creative, not just story writers and screenwriters. And these are the things I care about, but like building companies, doing lots of different things. This window will not be open forever. And it doesn't mean you'll never have another opportunity, but there's a magic in the air right now. This is the time to find, if you are not the type to build something yourself, then find someone who's building and help them, because getting in on the ground floor is amazing. And so I just encourage everyone out there to just start doing it. Don't think anymore. Don't sit on the sidelines. I'm not saying we all got to go docs and like go all full face fag and like, oh, this is me. Like this is my forehead Trump tattoo. But I do think it's time to start getting out of the foxhole, coming out of the bunker, stop acting like guerrillas, and start acting like the occupying army that we are, because
Out
this
of
is
the
our
goon
country.
cave into the streets. Out of the goon cave into the streets.
Plato's Goon Cave, man. No, but it is time to come out of the goon cave and to goon in the streets. And it's the more we do it, the more, and we don't have to be ridiculous about it, but just not hiding. There's too much to say at this point for a wrap up, but we have worked very hard to get to where we're at. It would be criminal to let this be the finish line. This is the starting gun. Like what just happened in our country, what's happening right now, we can celebrate it, but it's the starting gun, not the finish line. And it's, it's time to finish the fight, right? Just to get back to John Halo. But I do hope everybody enjoys these wonderful executive order holiday time. But it is time to start buying everybody's books, getting as much money as we can, going in every direction that we can in our sphere, and getting more stuff created because big things are around the corner, and I'm excited to be part of some of it.
Yeah, I can't add to that. Speaking of which, Double Dealer Magazine issue 14 is out right now. Go ahead and grab yourself a copy. You can become a paid subscriber on the Double Dealer Substack. You know about me and my books and whatever. And I don't know how to end podcasts, so I will say insert ending.